title of this conference is Policy, Power, and Sectarianism. This is truly timely and relevant discussion at this time of upheaval and profound change in the Middle East. There is no denying that sectarianism and sectarian conflict is a dominant narrative for the present upheaval in our part of the world today. For sure, history remains a prime factor dictating the present-day dynamics in the Middle East, particularly in the Middle East, more so in the Middle East than other parts of the world, because the Middle East is the cradle of the three major religions. History and God matters in our part of the world. Sectarianism, latent or otherwise, sectarian discrimination, or for that matter, ethnic discrimination, is an inconvenient truth and a reality of our part of the world that has been with our societies for centuries and certainly in the last decades of modern Middle East. In certain cases, this has become institutional policy, even though unacknowledged, leading to domestic unrest, leading to senses of injustices and inequality in various societies that essentially undermine the legitimacy of many states and many countries. I will not bore you with details of history about the traces of the schism in Islam between Shias and Sunnis that could be traced back to the death of Prophet Muhammad. Some people, some historians may even argue that predates Prophet Muhammad in terms of the struggle between Bani Hashim and Bani Abdiddar, but that is not to be invoked too unduly. But historically, Sunni-Shia divide might have started as a political struggle, but ended up as a theological and doctrinal issue between two different sects of Islam. However, today, the sectarian narrative is mostly about competition for power, resources, and status. Religion and sectarianism provides an emotional narrative for rallying opinions and mobilizing people, and are easily leveraged by actors to promote their own interest. However, I want to say that the exclusive focus on sectarianism and the sectarian narrative for the present-day upheaval in the Middle East is at best simplistic and can be dangerous and very misleading. The assumption that these conflicts in today's Middle East are primordial and thus beyond political solutions is simply wrong. Conflict dynamics in recent Middle East were not always defined along Shia and Sunni divide. Look at the Lebanese civil war. It was a sectarian conflict between Christians and Muslims for some time, with Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims on the same side. Look at Yemen today. Between 1962 and 1970, Saudi Arabia supported the Zaydi Imam against the revolutionary Republicans that were supported by Sunni Egypt of the time. The best framework to understand in present-day dynamics in the Middle East, in my opinion, is the failure of the modern nation-state, which has been the cornerstone of the regional order, the political and security order. I dare say, in the presence of so many distinguished scholars and analysts and policy makers, the old order of the Middle East, the 20th century political and security order of the Middle East is collapsing, might have collapsed definitively. And we are witnessing a struggle between key regional actors to redefine the new regional order. My understanding of my part of the world, there are three major power centers: Arabia, Anatolia, and Persia. They have been at it for millennia and often collided, competed in Mesopotamia, to define the regional order. The present day dynamics undeniably has a lot to do with domestic issues in various countries, and I believe that is a fundamental issue, undeniably so. But at the end of the day, we are witnessing the struggle for defining a new regional order after the end of that order that dominated the Middle East for much of the 20th century. Daesh, in my opinion, is a stark, clear manifestation of the mess, of the upheaval that we are dealing with. Daesh, and before Daesh, Al-Qaeda and Zarqawi utilized the sectarian narrative to the extreme, trying to mobilize, on one hand, the Sunni communities, but at the same time trying to draw in the Shias into a conflict that could be defined in terms of sectarianism. This is a very difficult situation that we are going through today. It is truly a mess, and there are no other words to describe that what we are going through but being a mess. 20th century, many might celebrate it as a century of stability and modernity in the Middle East, but for many citizens of that part of the world, including myself, it has meant a lot of denial of rights, subjugation, persecution, and even genocide, corruption, wars. Yes, the 20th century Middle East began with high hopes of a modern state structure. I am a Kurd from Iraq. Monarchy at that time began with a lot of expectations, and to be fair, people, as they reflect back on that era, that was the golden age for Iraqi history. And I know many communists and many leftists who fought the monarchy at that time are regretting what they have done, but that is a revisionist sense of history. But since 1958 and onward, the onset of Arab nationalism and the coups, culminating in Saddam Hussein's dictatorship, 2003, the war, the strife, the conflict in Iraq, this has not been a happy situation for Iraqis by and large. As I look at Syria and the carnage in Syria, the devastation that the people of Syria have to endure, this is truly unimaginable and unacceptable by any stretch of imagination. My sense that as we look to the future, we definitely need to acknowledge what we have is unacceptable, and the solution cannot be in the restoration of the status quo ante. I know many would say, only if that event did not happen, we would not be in the mess that we are. We were in a mess in the Middle East, for those of us who come from there, to varying degrees, culminating in the disaster that we are dealing with. So in my opinion, for this day, the most important thing that we can do is to acknowledge the failure and the difficulty that we are in. We cannot just simply run away from it and thinking that only if we did not do that particular decision or that particular move, things could have been different. We need to readdress some fundamental issues that has led to the present crisis. Acknowledging the failure will mean to really look in a very fundamental and a very serious way at the issues that have led to the present day dynamics in the Middle East. But also to that issue that allows extremists to use the sectarian card, the card of religion, the issues of God, to justify killing and murder and the type of carnage that we are seeing. I believe the essential factor for Middle Eastern societies is the issue of legitimacy and good governance. States, governments in my part of the world have lost legitimacy through corruption, nepotism, wars, denial of basic rights. Having had high expectations of democracy in my country, I have to acknowledge that these are yet to be realized and may be far-fetched, but fundamentally, the issue of legitimacy and good governance, acquiescence of people that can relate to their elites and their governments as something legitimate, matters, so that people don't take refuge in these extremist ideologies and justify and condone killings of people in the name of God. Issue of economic opportunities do matter. There are legions of younger people across the Arab world, across the Muslim world, that do not have opportunities for productive jobs. This is not an easy solution, easy problem to be resolved. But I also want to say this cannot be resolved by any one country at a time, or even by the international system as a whole. Countries in that part of the world, certainly the richer countries, need to invest more. For Gulf countries to spend and invest in countries like Egypt, countries like Jordan, is not just helping those countries, it's also an investment in their own securities. There is something to be learned from the European experience about richer European nations bringing in the poorer parts of Europe, in part as an investment in their own security and economic prosperity. Transregional economic investment matters. Yes, richer nations can have their sovereign funds invested in the stock markets in New York and London, but it pays well also to be investing in the neighborhood, so that this have and have not is not a constant cause of instability and problems. Yes, we do need to look at the regional order and the international order. The collapse of this regional order, the continuing competitive and rivalry between the Iranians, the Turks, and the Arabs creates a lot of opportunities for the extremists and a lot of cracks in the system. I draw on one example, recent example, that of Afghanistan. Many in the West, many in the Arab world, supported the Mujahideens in Afghanistan in order to defeat the Soviet Union and its proxy. In the process, a lot of details were overlooked. In the process, an incubating environment was created that allowed the emergence of extremists like Al-Qaeda. Mission accomplished, Soviet Union defeated. Al-Qaeda became a cancer that afflicted not only Muslim societies, but also the rest of the world. I do believe a similar dynamic is unfolding in Syria, has been unfolding in Syria. In the name of defeating Assad, defeating the Iranian proxy, a lot of resources and a lot of actors have gone into that country. I'm a Kurd, I'm an Iraqi that has a lot of bad memories of the Ba'ath regime. So no one can accuse me of being lenient on the Ba'ath regime of Syria that has committed so many crimes and so many atrocities. But what happened in Syria was a travesty for the plight of the Syrian people in terms of the rights and hijacking their aspiration for a decent country and a decent government. At the end of the day, we have all these extremist groups that are running around, not only threatening the Syrian people, threatening Iraq, threatening the entire neighborhood, threatening the international community. So regardless of this competitive nature of the relationship between these major actors and perhaps the international actors, I think these key players, together with the Americans, the Europeans, the Russians, really need to come together and make sure that this rivalry does not mean a crack in the system for these extremists to hijack these societies in these countries, because these problems will not be confined to any of these countries. I remember the early days, and many of our friends from the early days of the Iraqi transition are here. Many of our neighbors were gleeing about the violence in Iraq, were gleeing about the car bombs that were going and being detonated across Iraq. Now that cancer is really all over the place. Nobody can be immune from that. We can disagree politically, we can disagree about fundamental interests, but I hope that we can be unified as regional actors, as international actors, to making sure that these extremists cannot come through the system, cannot come through the cracks of that system. In that context, also, the regional actors and the international community really need to look very seriously at the issue of the political economy of these conflicts. These terrorists and these extremist organizations are able to raise money, are able to move money, are able to sell oil across international markets, generate a lot of resources that are enabling them to sustain this killing machine. I hope Chatham House and the distinguished colleagues that are here really will have a focus on this issue of political economy. There is a reason why these conflicts go on and on and on. There is a lot of money to be made out of it. From my own experience in the Iraqi government, this is not just about the extremists, this is about the corrupt political elites, the corrupt security establishments that feed on these extremists as well in a situation of symbiosis and basically keep these conflicts going. Last but definitely not least, we do have a problem of our culture, of our religious institutions in my part of the world. This is something that the Americans, the Brits, or even Chatham House cannot do for us. Middle Easterners, Muslims in particular, we really need to be awakened to the reality that we do have a problem. Our religion has been hijacked, is being hijacked by extremists who in the name of Islam, in the name of God, are condoning so much violence and so much chaos and so much brutality. The religious institutions really need to get to grips with that. Al-Azhar, Al-Sharif, Dar al-Ifta, Najaf, Qum, these are the major centers of Islam, really need to come together and say, not in our name, not in the name of Muslims. Recently, not so recently, about a year ago or so, Ayatollah Sistani issued a statement calling for a civil state in Islam, calling for a civil state in Iraq, that a religious state will mean essentially sectarian strife. I believe that statement was very important, very crucial, because even though it was not well covered by the international media, people saw just in the context of the Iraqi dynamics. I think Najaf, for what it represents in terms of the center of Shia Islam, that statement from Ayatollah Sistani had a lot of significance of where the religious debate needs to go. I believe that Islam, Muslims, we really need to have this debate in a very frank and direct way. I was educated in the West. I believe in modernity. I think I do. But I do believe the Middle East did not do well with importation of certain Western ideas in extreme ways. Secularism, the way it was imported to our part of the world by Ataturk and by Mohammad Raza Shah, even though Nazanin is here, she corrected me last time that Mohammad Raza Shah was not like that, but anyhow. Raza Shah, sorry. This was done in such an extreme way, such an extreme separation of mosque and state, that really pushed, in the name of modernity, religion to the dark corners of the mosques. My experience in Britain, my experience in the United States, secularism here does not mean disregarding religion, does not mean pushing away religion. Religion and the religious values is very much part of public discourse. That debate needs to be had in the Muslim world about the proper role of religion in public life. We are yet to have that. And instead of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or whoever else is speaking in the name of Muslims, mainstream Muslim institutions, Al-Azhar and the other institutions that I have alluded to, really need to come to grips with this. What was started in the early part of the 20th century, open-minded Muslim leaders and thinkers, people like Muhammad Abda and others, really need to be completed. That debate was not concluded at the time because in the name of nationalism, secularism, modernity, and whatever, was incomplete. The time has come for that serious debate, and that debate has to be had by Muslims. Others cannot do it for us. This is early morning, and we do not want to end on a bad note, but I do take solace from the history of Europe. Religious wars in Europe were quite a dominant feature. I was telling a friend yesterday, Reformation in Christianity began when the age of Christianity was about 1,500 years of age. Ironically, today, Muslim religion is also about that age. This is not to say that we will have to wait another 500 years. But think of it. Europe suffered 2 major world wars in the 20th century, overcome that. Middle East is having serious difficulties. But let's hope out of this mess, out of this disaster, out of this carnage, the affirmation will be there to make sure that people of that part of the world, with the help of the international community who are very much, whose interests are very much at stake with what is going on there, we can really make sure that the future is different from our past. We have to do it. We have no other choice. It's going to be messy. It's going to take time, but we have to do it. But in answer to your question about policy, power, and sectarianism, it is about power, it's about resources, it's about justice, it's about a sense of legitimacy in our part of the world. And I hope this conference will shed some light on the way forward as well. Thank you, Jane.